A Dharma talk is a meditation. So allow a Dharma talk to be like listening to the sound of rain or listening to meditation instructions. It's not something you have to get or figure out. It's just letting the words flow through. This talk is about the one unchanging thing. What is the one unchanging thing? Well, in a nutshell, it's you, the awareness you, here now. It's deathless, timeless awareness, here now. And more on that later. But in a time of change, I think that we're really looking for safety when there's a lot of change and suffering in the world. So we're often looking outside. We're trying to grasp onto certain causes and conditions, people, places, and things to keep us safe, but those are impermanent. So we really come up empty-handed. So I wanted to do this talk during these times to give us some tools to connect with that are impermanent, that are permanent in the impermanent world, that are things we can anchor into. You know, this time of change, we can end up in what's like a hurricane of humanity. And it's just whirling around. So one thing to be aware of is how can each of us be the eye of the hurricane? And some of the tools I'm going to talk about will address that. Not blending with the hurricane of humanity, not getting lost, not expecting the world to be the solution. You're the solution. You can be the eye of the storm. You know, and as this onslaught of fears and thoughts happens, which it does during times of difficulty, how to be that eye of the storm or the outer edges of the storm. There's calmness there as well. You can be both. And, you know, this is not an elaborate thing. It's a simple thing, how to rest in the one unchanging thing. And it's available to anyone. And it's here now. The thing about Vipassana meditation, and I've been doing it for getting close to 40 years now, is it really emphasizes looking at the changing nature of things. So we look at the changing nature of breath and of thoughts and of emotions, which is great, you know, bringing mindfulness to the changing nature of things. But probably it's the weakness of Vipassana practice is it doesn't really focus on the one unchanging thing. It doesn't really look at what can we anchor into that's timeless, changeless. So in this talk, I'll do some borrowing from Tibetan and Advaita traditions because they address this one unchanging thing with more tools than Vipassana does. And they talk about, the Tibetans talk about stabilizing the view, abiding in the ground of being. And this isn't a new thing, the unchanging thing. The Buddha did talk about it. He talked about Nibbana as the deathless, the nameless, the formless, the unconditioned. something that didn't have a birth or a death. So the Buddha was, he pointed to this, and it's a sense of having tools and practices to remember this during our changing times. In Tibetan Buddhism, there's often, it's talked about, there's two schools of awakening. One is sort of what I refer to as the whittling away school. So we're kind of wearing down greed, hatred, and delusion. We're wearing down the afflictive emotions through, practices of the precepts or ethical behavior, through mindfulness. We're whittling away the difficulties of human nature. And then the other school is more the building up and the shining up and out from within, where we're finding that true nature, that light of true nature, and we're just shining it up. And then the difficulties and the places where that's not you get pushed out. And of course, they're both true, and we will use both of them. And we'll talk a little bit about both of them today. The word meditation in Pali means cultivation. Pali is the language at the time of the Buddha. So what we're really doing is we're cultivating both of these qualities of whittling away things that might be difficulties or not true about ourselves, and we're cultivating bringing that light of true nature up and out. And it's great because both of these schools of thought, they hold this kind of paradox, right? Of shining up and out and working with things that are problems. And Adyashanti addresses this paradox in a really nice quotation. He says, "Our minds have a hard time dealing with the paradox that life is whole and complete while also being a mess." Our minds have a hard time dealing with the paradox that life is whole and complete while also being a mess. So that's our practice, isn't it? Holding that messiness of life being the resolution, the integration of both the wholeness and the messiness. Now, in Buddhism, the first noble truth, that's really the main tenet of Buddhism, is there is suffering, there is messiness, right? But it doesn't just stop there. It's not just this round and around in some kind of torture chamber of messiness. It keeps going to there's the way out of suffering, the second noble truth. So there's the cause of suffering, the second noble truth, the third noble truth, the way to stop suffering. And then the fourth noble truth, the path in which to do that. Many of us do feel, though, that life is just kind of this first noble truth, around and around and around. I had one student the other day tell me, he said, I'm either face down in the ditch or I'm in the ditch. And, either way, there's that suffering component of the really difficult days where you're face down in the ditch, or just the days where you're in the ditch. And it can just feel like that relentlessness. But again, this suffering is to help us learn about freedom. It's not just the endless suffering of being in the ditch. It's a freedom path. So don't forget this. You want to keep going. With depression and anxiety, I can attest to personally that your depression, your anxiety, whatever the suffering is you're working with, it's a freedom path. If you keep going and don't give up, you'll learn about the second noble truth and the third noble truth and the fourth. How does this lead to the unchanging thing? And the difficulty that we're facing that can take us to the unchanging thing, it's kind of like an alarm clock going off. And my teacher jokes, he said, if it wasn't for suffering, you would sleep forever. And you know how that is when you're in a really good dream. You're like, oh, let me go back to sleep. Don't wake me up. Leave me alone. So to just see the value of suffering as something that wakes us up, it's like jerking in a dream. You know how when you have some kind of difficulty in a dream, it jerks your body, it jostles you, and then that helps you wake up. And we can hold suffering in that way. So there's these two schools of thought of the whittling away and working with the suffering and the opening up and out to our true nature. And I'm going to talk about some practices that will help with this opening up of our true nature. And that's really knowing the unchanging thing. And when I sat down to really write this talk, I thought about all the tools and components that help us know the unchanging thing. And I came up with an acronym called SEAT, S-E-A-T, like to take your seat under the Bodhi tree, to take your enlightenment seat. And it's an acronym to help you remember what these tools are. So the S of seat is silence. The E is the eye, watching, or the eye of the storm. The A is the actual, what's here now without your thoughts about it. And the T is the timeless. So starting with the S, the silence. Silence is an unchanging thing. It's always here. You and I could make all the noise in the world and it would return to silence. It's the default. So you can trust in that. This primordial silence that everything returns to. Very powerful when you reflect on it. And I also think that space is like that. We can have a lot of thoughts and everything kind of comes back to space. There's space between thoughts. There's space between emotions. So you could call it silence, space, emptiness. Nyosho Rinpoche, he says, there is no teaching more profound than emptiness. And you could translate to that to there's no teaching more profound than silence, than space, than emptiness. And, why would he say this? It's really because silence transcends everything. Everything returns to silence. And silence is like the outside of that storm or the space outside the storm. It can hold everything. So no matter what you're going through right now, anxiety, fear, body pain, the stillness, the space is bigger than that. It holds that. So it's really a good refuge to come back to over and over again, that the silence and space holds your distress always. always holds your distress, yours and others. Something bigger than your mind is holding the emotions, the distress. A good way to think about this is like your distressing emotions is like one guy in a big, huge, empty stadium, 30,000 seats, right? And there's one little person in the stadium in a chair, but he's got a microphone. And that's the voice of your depression or anxiety. The stadium is huge and empty. There's nothing happening. It's empty. But that one little voice of your mind with the microphone can fill up the whole stadium. It's that Wizard of Oz illusion. And to remember that, majority of you is that empty space, even though that guy has the microphone. So a good practice, I always like to give practices with this silence or this S of the SEAT acronym is what's here now that's bigger than a thought or feeling. So when you're caught with that person with the microphone, what's here now that's bigger than that? Or what's holding all of this? And then you can feel outside the storm. Another practice to do with silence that's a really nice daily life practice is you can lead with the core of silence from within. You can pull up the silence in whatever you do. So you know how when somebody's like learning to be a really good singer, especially opera singers, they learn to pull their voice up from the belly rather than sing from the chest and the throat. So you can do that same thing when you're moving, when you're talking, and you can even try it now when you're looking around. Like right now, looking around the room, look from the silence and the stillness in your being, rather from the mind and the chatter. See what it's like to look from the silence right now. And let that core of stillness, as you draw it up, inform everything that you do. So the second tool is the E of the seat, the I. And like I said, that's like the eye of the storm. It's also the eye, like, your seeing eye that is just watching the difficulties of life. That doesn't change. What's looking at fear, what's looking at worry, that doesn't change. The witness itself. When you're face down in the ditch, what is it knows you're face down in the ditch? The witness itself, the eye that's looking, is never in the ditch. And that's a very important thing if you can see that, no matter how strong depression, anxiety, fear is. The witness itself is never blended with that fear. The I is the unchanging thing. What is it, the you that knows depression and anxiety? The witness is always fine. The witness is always okay. And sometimes you can think about the eye almost like a roving GoPro camera eye. There's just seeing this and that and that and that. It's not blending with what it's seeing. That roving camera eye of awareness itself never changes, doesn't collapse in fear, doesn't get angry. And that roving camera eye can just watch your mind constantly cranking out thoughts, like that cartoon I showed. Every mistake you've ever made comes up when you try to be quiet. But the camera eye can just see that happening and not be any of it. And this really goes to the core of the Buddha's teachings. In the Bahia Sutta, he talked about in the seeing, there's just the seeing. In the herd, there's just the herd. So it's just this pure seeing. That's what we're getting to, the seeing without the narrative. The essence of awareness that never changes. And one thing about this eye of awareness to remember is that it's not yours. We can make it about my roving camera eye, right? But there's just one awareness. There's one universal eye that you might be experiencing, seeing through your eyes. But don't make that eye and that ability to just be in the seeing personal. Don't make it personal. It's the one awareness eye. And if you want a practice with this, you can ask yourself, what's the awareness that will be here after I die, after the mind and body is gone? And just feel that for a minute. I mean, what is the awareness? It wouldn't be a personal awareness, right? What is this awareness that will be here after you no longer have a body or mind? Something will be here. That's the unchanging thing. So the S for silence, the E for the I, the A is for actual. The actual is reality here now. What's actually here without the words, pure life without your thoughts. And we miss that because we're so, we see life through our narrative, through our words and concepts, that I really wanted to emphasize this idea of the actual as a practice. And one way to know the actual is to really go out in nature. Everything is just doing itself in nature. Trees are growing, flowers are blooming. No one's telling them what to do. There's no central command person like your mind saying, do this, do that. Everything is just happening like on autopilot, all connected. And that's the actual. In nature, things are just happening without the thoughts. And you can watch that. Everything in nature is being done without words or talking. Everything in nature is being done without anyone doing it. There's the doing without a doer. And we can see this in our own bodies. The heart is being beat. The breath is happening. We're not doing it. It's been happening all of today. And that's the actual without the thought. It's all being done. So if you can occasionally bring awareness to that and rest in that, things are being done, but with no doer. And, you know, our mind likes to really fill up the space, that whole stadium, with words. So it's really dropping into, you know, what's happening before the mind fills up the space. And I like to ask the question of what's happening without the commentary. What's the actual here now without a thought? And sometimes you can even ask yourself throughout the day, is this a thought or is this the actual? Because we don't realize it, but we're really living in the thoughts about things versus the actual. So, you know, just little tools to move you below the thoughts. What's happening right now that's not a thought. And it's not that we're against thinking, it's just that thinking is not quite the truth. It's thinking is really a replay of the actual. It's a commentary on the actual. So the actual and the awareness of the actual as the unchanging thing is just a way to get you more connected with the truth of the way things are. You know, forms and concepts and our thoughts are like the surface level of infinite life. So when we ask, you know, what's the actual, what's not a thought, we're trying to access that infinite life sphere that's here now, that delicious infinite life happening as you. Words and concepts are only descriptors of infinite life. You can eat the meal instead of reading about it. And the Buddha had a really good example of this. He said to his monks, he grabbed some leaves in the forest and he said, you know, okay, you can have these leaves in your hand. You know, what you think, who you believe you are. Or you can have the whole forest. And what do you want? You want to have the leaves in your hand, your words, your concepts, or do you want the whole forest, infinite life? But surprisingly, many of us, you know, we're looking at the leaves and wow, they're really colorful. And I've gathered them throughout my whole life. And I don't know, you know, I don't know about dropping those leaves. The whole forest, that sounds like a Ponzi scheme, you know, I'm not so sure about that. You know, will I really get the whole forest and drop these leaves? So it's that courage to let go of all your thoughts and concepts so you can have infinite life. You can be the whole forest, or you can hold on to those leaves that we know, that impermanent for the whole thing. And the Tibetans have an analogy as well with this. They say that, you know, when you're looking through the self view, and through our thoughts and concepts, and the ego view is like looking at the sky through a straw. And when you let go of the attachment to the words, concepts, the ego view, then you're just the sky. There's just looking, no straw, taking that away, infinite space, sky, you. So the SEAT acronym, silence, I, roving camera I, the A, the actual, and the T is the timeless. We get really caught up in the I, me, and mind and our personal time frame and the world as it relates to me and my limited time on this earth. We forget there's this timeless universe, infinitely expanding. Our human time frame is so tiny in the timeless. So it's important to open up to this unchanging thing, this timeless presence that's here now. You know, when we get caught in our limited time frame, it creates suffering because it becomes us against the world and me trying to figure out the pleasure and pain and get what I need to be safe. And then that never works. And we can never get enough pleasure and pain to be safe. So just going around and around. And that's how we end up in the ditch over and over and over again. That pleasure and pain matrix. And my teacher laughs. He says, you know, Amita, every day it's you against the universe. He said, how well is that going to work? How well does that work? So it's moving out of that limited time-bound me to the timeless. And part of that is seeing that there's not two. It's not you versus the world. One of the questions that I use to help with bringing this unchanging, timeless view on when I've got my little straw perspective happening is to ask myself, you know, what is the infinite, timeless view of this? When you maybe look at the war, you look at, you know, you're having COVID and you're struggling with the body. You know, what is the infinite, timeless view of this? Or sometimes I'll say, what's the forever view? How would the eyes of the Buddha see this? So it's that opening it up to the unchanging view. And you can even feel that right now as you ask yourself, you know, what's the timeless view of us listening to this talk or struggling with whatever it is? What is that timeless, forever view right now? And really, this timeless view it's part of the fourth noble truth, which is the Eightfold Path out of suffering. And the first tool in the way out of suffering is what's called right view. And that's the most important one. That's why it comes first. And right view isn't the me, my view. It's the forever view. The unlimited view is right view. The infinite view is how to start the way out of suffering. And you know, you don't have to go far to see this. When you look in a newborn, a baby's eyes, you know, they don't have any idea of self yet and thoughts of I, me, and mine. So you can kind of see the infinite view in the eyes of a newborn. You can see the infinite view in animals' eyes. You know, first time I looked into the eyes of a dolphin, I just saw like into eternity. Because they don't have this concept of self like we do. So there's the infinite view is possible in looking into newborn and animals' eyes. And one thing to realize with this infinite view is it's not that you are in life. We often think, again, me against the universe. I'm in life. I'm trying to negotiate the difficulties of life. What if you are life itself? You're all of it. You're life itself. Then what would be unsafe? What would be a problem? And when you start to see this, it's almost like you're taking this jigsaw puzzle piece that's you, and you're looking at your piece and you're going, well, why is it this shape and form? And what is this? What's the meaning of my piece, right? But all of a sudden, then there's the 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, and you're the last piece. And you see the puzzle and you pop it in, and boom, what seemed like a separate piece of you all of a sudden becomes the one jigsaw puzzle. No more pieces. And you can't even know where your piece is once you pop it in. And you're that whole puzzle that both had pieces and now never has pieces. It's the one thing. So that's what we're doing in practice, where we're putting our piece back into the whole thing of infinite life itself as you. This infinite, timeless view. There's a poem by Thich Nhat Hanh about this called The Old Mendicant. And this was read at his cremation, and it really looks at this timeless view. Being rock, being gas, being mist, being mind, being the Masons traveling among the galaxies at the speed of light. You have come here, my beloved, and your blue eyes shine so beautiful, so deep. You have taken the path traced for you from the non-beginning and the never-ending. You say that on your way here, you have gone through many millions of births and deaths. Innumerable times you have been transformed into firestorms in outer space. You have used your only body to measure the age of mountains and rivers. You have manifested yourself as trees, grass, butterflies, single-celled being, and chrysanthemums. But the eyes with which you look at me this morning tell me that you have never died. Your smile invites me into the game, whose beginning no one knows, the game of hide and seek. O green caterpillar, you are solemnly using your body to measure the length of the rose branch that grew up last summer. Everyone says that you, my beloved, were just born this spring. Tell me, how long have you been around? Why wait until this moment to reveal yourself to me, carrying with you that smile, which is so silent and so deep? O caterpillars, suns, moons, and stars flow out each time I exhale. Who knows that infinitely large must be found in your tiny body? Upon each point of your body, thousands of Buddha fields have been established. With each stretch of your body, you measure time from the non-beginning to the never-ending. The great mendicant of old is still there on Vulture Peak, contemplating the ever-splendid sunset. Gautama, how strange. Who said the Undambara flower blooms only once every 3,000 years? The sound of the rising tide, you cannot help hearing it if you have an attentive ear. The eyes with which you look at me this morning tell me you have never died. So it's knowing this unchanging nature that we are. So some really quick things on working with thoughts. We're like the whittling away. So we had the seat, the silence, the I, the actual, the timeless. And, you know, as we work with that person in the microphone, in the big empty stadium, you know, you can unplug the microphone, you can turn it down. You can focus on that empty space. You cannot touch the thoughts. They can be talking, but thoughts are like burning. And I spoke in another retreat on keeping the open hand of thought. So, you know, to prevent rope burns, you know, when the thoughts come through and the difficulties, when that person holding the mic is saying, you know, doubting things to you or angry things, just keeping that open hand of thought with it, letting it all move through. And that's really the second noble truth of that can prevent suffering, is not clinging, the second, the third. You know, my teacher keeps saying, don't touch, don't touch, don't touch. Don't touch your thoughts, don't touch the doubt, don't touch the fear. That open hand of thought that doesn't touch. One wonderful young woman I work with, she said she was excited about, she said, you know, one of the best things I learned from couples therapy is like my judgments are not reality. And I'm like, yeah. She's learned to not touch her judgments. And, you know, that's good in relationship when you don't touch your judgments about yourself or your partner. So that don't touch the judgments. They're not reality, that open hand of thought. Adyashanti says, for most of us, wherever the mind goes, you go. When your mind's happy, you're happy. When your mind's sad, you're sad. You follow your mind like being led by a big dog on a leash. So let go of the leash. Don't touch. It's just words. It's just sounds. A-E-I-O-U. It's just sounds. Open hand of thought. And in closing, just to remember to not give up. Your whole life is this path. And I was reflecting on how the Buddha's attendant, Ananda, for 25 years, he helped the Buddha. He listened to every lecture he ever gave. He listened to every advice he gave to people. And he never woke up. You can imagine what that was. He probably had a lot of shame and frustration parts about that. But he didn't wake up till after the Buddha died. So whether it takes 6 years like the Buddha or 25 years like Ananda, or 40 years or your whole life or lifetimes, don't give up. We're here to keep going. No matter what the person in the stadium is saying, keep going. Your judgment is irrelevant. Keep trusting the process. We're waking up together. Awakening is one thing taken all the way through. One thing taken all the way through, no matter how long it takes. So take your seat. Remember the silence, the I, the actual, the timeless. And I'd like to end with a poem. It's a new poem by David Whyte, Irish poet who lives in the Northwest now. It's called Your Prayer. Your prayer only began with words. Each one you realize just a hand on the door to silence. Even in your gathered, chanted strength, what you said in the end was only a shoulder against the grain of wood, trying to keep the entrance open, until that door, which had been no door at all, gave in to necessary grief, which is really only the full understanding of what you were missing all along, which is really just that vulnerability you needed to make a proper invitation, which is really just you admitting the full depth of your love at last. The heartbroken heart coming to heartfelt rest, the opening inside you now filled to the gleaming brim and casting its generous beam. The part of you you thought was foolish, the wisest voice of all. So coming to that heartbroken heart, coming to heartfelt rest. That's the one unchanging thing. So let's just take a moment to sit before I ring the bell, and we'll have our walking meditation. Just being that silence, the I that sees all, the actual here now without your thoughts, and the timeless. Without the story of you. So thank you for listening. I'm sorry I went a few minutes over. We'll have some mindfulness in our homes for 10 minutes and come back for another sitting meditation on the half an hour. Okay.